Meghan, I almost understood. She's a Hollywood B-list to be charitable actress. She was a social climber. Her whole thing is about image. So I can see why she's so easy to upset when it comes to bad press. But Harry he was the grandson of the king. He's a prince. I was surprised at how much, according to your reporting, he follows the media and follows social media and cares about every word that's written. And your reporting and other reporting has now suggested he believes he's got a limited time to be on the world stage because Prince George is aging by the moment and will overtake him as the next best thing in the British tabloids and so on. I was shocked to hear that. I mean, is that who he is?
Well, I think Harry is a very complicated person because he's not very intelligent and undoubtedly remains damaged by the early death of his mother, Diana. And he very foolishly blames the media for having, in his words, murdered her, which is complete nonsense. But I think he loved the adulation. He loved it when he was being praised, especially when he was a soldier. But then he became criticized, firstly because he became drunk in public, then he wore a Nazi uniform at a party, then he was wearing absolutely nothing in the nude at the party in Las Vegas, and he couldn't cope with the criticism because in his view, he is a target. And it didn't help that his telephones were hacked by News International, Rupert Murdoch's group here in London. And so he became hypersensitive and blamed the media for the crashes of his relationships, never thinking that they could have something to do with himself. So he's a very complicated, depressed, unintelligent man who is seeking a role and has got really nobody on whom he could rely, which is in the end where Meghan stepped in. I mean, a needy man met a woman who could help him with his needs.
I had always looked at it more as, oh, she landed this prince. That's what she was out for. We know that she was hunting for someone of wealth, of notoriety in Great Britain, and she landed, the biggest you could land. But it worked the other way too. He was feeling irrelevant. She comes along. She's a somewhat well-known person, or at least that was his impression. And she's mixed race. She could elevate his star as well. It worked both ways.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man in England from 2013 onwards, when her marriage had crashed and she couldn't find anyone in Canada at the time. And she wanted wealth and she wanted fame. And there's no doubt she targeted Harry and found someone who was a childhood friend of his who could introduce them. And then on the days before they met at their blind meeting in a club in London, she researched Harry very carefully and knew exactly what buttons to press, that he would like Africa, was interested in animals, was interested in philanthropy. She's very tactile, she's very seductive. And she landed him on the first night, even on his own admission. He says, I realized on the first date, she was the one. And of course, that's because she's also a great, in that sense, an actress. She knew exactly how to play. And the point about Meghan is easy to dislike her. But the point about her is that in her own terms, she is an astonishing success. She came from nothing, not a very successful actress. She had no money. She had no future after the Suits series in Canada. And suddenly she's an international star with quite a lot of money. And of course, in her terms, that's a great success.
Now, of course, she lied about never having Googled Harry when she gave an interview early on. We know from her friends that's not true, that she was very focused on the royals and had visited Buckingham Palace and had watched Harry at length after his mother died. So we know that's not true. And she turns out to be a serial fabulist, as your book outlines brilliantly. I mean, the lies from this woman come regularly, and they're bold. They're big and they're bold. But I want to go back to something you said about Diana, because I was saying to my husband, I said, Tom he spares no one. He's very honest about what he has found and what's real and what's not, whether it's positive or negative. And the thing about Diana actually surprised me, Tom. From over here, the narrative has always been, oh, poor Diana, the media, they basically killed her. The paparazzi chased her into this tunnel in France, and that's what led to her death. And you just touched on it. There's much, much more to that story too. And Diana very much had a role in manipulating the press and inviting the press to hound her in a way few have really spent time on in the press. Can you spend some time on that here?
Yes, I mean, I think you've got to go back very briefly to the beginning, that Diana herself was the product of a very broken family. Her mother literally dumped the children, ran off with somebody else. And her father wasn't interested in his children, and nor was her stepmother, really. So she was a very broken woman when she met Prince Charles, and that was, as we all know, a terribly unhappy marriage. But she then became glamorous. She suddenly discovered her fame because she was very beautiful and very charming, and she loved the attention. And she obviously spotted particular journalists who not only attracted her, but would do what she wanted. And that was, of course, Andrew Morton in the writing of that amazing book, and then Richard Kay of the Mail, Daily Mail in London, and also the famous BBC interview. And she fluttered her eyelids. But most important of all, in that last meeting with Jodie Fayed in the south of France, she would telephone or text the photographers and the journalists to tell them where she would be and when she could be spotted. So she encouraged the paparazzi. And then let's forget, it wasn't the paparazzi that killed her in the tunnel. It was a drunken driver employed by Mohammed Fayed. And that was the cause of the death. And she wasn't wearing a safety belt. So, but Harry doesn't want to know any of that truth. That's the trouble with Harry. He just likes, because in his simple way, the paparazzi murdered my mother. Well, it wasn't as simple as that at all. And she was a person who not only manipulated, but also went through quite a lot of men after Charles. I mean, she was a beautiful woman. There were many men who chased her, and she reciprocated. She was having a good time too.
Right. Of course, you spend some time in the book on how there's been so much speculation about whether Charles is indeed the biological father of Harry, and how some were trying to get a hair sample of some of her lovers to see whether, well, to get a hair sample from Harry to see whether it matched up with the biology of another lover. Something that Harry's had to live with too, wondering, and the speculation. So there are similarities between Diana and Meghan Markle in that way, in that they've suffered they both suffered some negative coverage, but they both have manipulated the press. I mean, Meghan is one of the first to manipulate the press. She claims she wants privacy, but she's working press opportunities every day. I mean, she'd love to see herself on the cover of Vanity Fair. There's no reason in the world they would have ever put her on that cover had it not been for the fact that she was dating Harry. But she pretended like she had accomplished something wonderful as a philanthropist that would land her on the cover. So Harry himself has been guilty of this, trying to compare her to Diana. The same thing's going to happen to her if the press keeps writing negative things. And you point out that these two misunderstand Diana entirely, both, well, most especially what made the press interested in and what made many love her.
Well, yeah, I think that's the problem. But they play the Diana card, just as I would say that, unfortunately, in some way, Meghan plays the race card. It's always the victim. And the victim always gets unquestioned sympathy without question. That's the way it plays at the moment in society. And Harry likes to portray Meghan as Diana, but they've got absolutely nothing in common at all, because Diana, for all her criticism of Charles, was always absolutely loyal to the Queen and completely loyal to the monarchy. And although obviously she thought about herself in terms of her life, she would never put herself above the monarchy, which of course was the downfall of Meghan in Britain, that she wanted to be number one. She didn't want to be part of a team. And they play the Diana card to suggest that when she is criticized, her fate will be the same as Diana's. But I think most people have seen through that now. They were shocked at the beginning and sympathetic. But I think to that extent, the sympathy is running thin now.